Okay, so yesterday we got this ball bouncing along the screen, and if see how it's going from 5 to -5, and we can see those numbers changing whenever it needs to bounce off the wall. We did that with 4 if statements. I'm just going to stop this ball here, and what I want to do to hit the paddle today is I want to, let me grab this ball. I want to zoom in a little bit so I can show you. I'll zoom in over here. What I want is for this ball to end up, if it's between this spot here and this spot here on the paddle, then I know that it's between the paddle left and right position. Okay, so I just have to find those spots. The way I'm going to do it is I need to know where my paddle is. My ball needs to know where my paddle is, and it doesn't know that yet. Okay, so I'm going to go to my paddle code. I might even cleverly rename it paddle 1. You can rename sprites to help you later on down the line. And I'm going to go in my paddle code and make variables so that I know where my paddle is at all times. I'm going to make a paddle variable called paddle1. That's the name of my paddle. X. That will be the X position of the paddle.
Spell X.
And then I'm going to make a second variable for the Y position. Paddle1 Y. Those are going to keep track in my code of where my paddle is. Now it doesn't run yet. It just says 0 and 0. So I haven't updated them in my code. But in this when clicked bar here, I'm going to make a forever loop. I want to run forever, constantly updating those variables. And I am going to set paddle X to X position. Remember, I'm coding on the paddles block of code here, so it's going to find the paddle's X position. And I'm going to set paddle Y to the Y position of the paddle, like that. So none of my code has changed. None of my program hasn't changed at all. However, if I run this, I will see my paddle. It knows where my paddle is now, which is important, right? It knows it's at the position 160. It knows its Y position as well. It knows that this edge of the screen is 240. This edge of the screen is 233. That's as far as it could go, I guess. We could actually stop it from going that far too, but maybe we won't do that yet. But we do now have a variable to keep track of our paddles X and Y. So this is perfect, because then we could go in here and check if the ball's position is ever bigger than this paddle position, but less than this left side of the paddle. Okay, so let's figure out how to do that. It's definitely going to be an if statement. I'm going to put my if statement in there. Okay, great. And what did I say? I want the ball's position to be greater than the paddle's position. So I'm going to do a greater than. Greater than. And the ball's position is simply just the X position right here, because I'm on the tennis ball code. And then the X position of the paddle has been transferred over through this variable. So if the X position is ever greater than the paddle's X position, and I need an and to make sure it's less than the, so I'm saying, is it ever greater than the left edge of the paddle, but less than the right edge of the paddle? So I need to figure out what the right edge of my paddle is. Put that in there like that. It's kind of a pain in the butt sometimes to get these to layer right. But now I need a less than. Oops, didn't mean to run that. And the X position of the ball is less than, and I need to know the left edge of my paddle. I know the right edge of my paddle is paddle X, so I'll put that in there, maybe plus however long my paddle is. I just have to figure out how long my paddle is. Now everyone's going to have a different paddle length because we all just drew them, right? But I'm just going to look at my tennis ball position here. I'm going to say, okay, that's... Wait, let me restart my program. Okay. I'm going to stop it here. My paddle is at 0 right now, and my ball is at 0 as well. Okay, so that's good for me because then when I move my ball over here to the left edge, or the right edge, sorry, I can see my paddle is probably about 100 long, right? Because I moved it over here and it went from 0 to 97. It went from -2 to 98. So I can tell my paddle is probably about 100 pixels long. Yours may be different if you had a longer paddle. To figure it out, just put the ball on the edge of the paddle, see what number it's at, and then move it over and see what the difference is. For me, it's about 100, so I'm just going to pick 100. And here I'm going to say plus 100. And I'm going to layer that in there. So what it should do is every time the ball is in between these two positions, anywhere on the screen, anywhere it's between the paddles, right now it's not going to do anything, but maybe I'll just put a say command in there to see if it will actually, like, see if it's above the paddle. Let me run that. See how it says hello? Maybe that's not a good way to do it because he's just going to say hello forever. Huh. Why don't I do something like say hello for 2 seconds, I guess? Or less than a very short period of time. Okay. Oh, it's really choppy. But I can tell it's working. As soon as he's over the paddle, he's slowing down, right? Anytime he's over that paddle, it knows, which is good. Okay. Boom, 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 boom. Mine's working really nicely. I know he's above the paddle. Also, it would work if he was below the paddle too. Watch, I'll try to get him below the paddle. I'm gonna run into some bugs with that, but it is working. It does know. I'm gonna try to get him below the paddle. See that? Anywhere in between the paddle's left and right edge, it works. And I can get him to slow down. You could actually make a game like this where your job is to keep this dude above the paddle at all times or something like that. I'm not gonna do that right now. The last thing I have to add is I have to make sure that... Okay, oops. The last thing I want to make sure is that the ball is never less than the Y position of the paddle. If it's ever less than the Y position of the paddle and between the two edges, I know it's hitting. Okay, so I'm just going to do a less than inside of my if statement. I'm going to do an if statement inside of an if statement. So in here, instead of saying hello, I'm going to say if, oops, I want to get rid of this hello for now. If my Y position of my ball is ever less than my paddle's Y position, then I'll know it's hitting as long as it's between the left and right edge. A little bit complicated to think about, but I'm going to go, there's other ways to get to see if it hits, but I think this is the purest way to do it. Okay, there are built-in things with Scratch like saying if it's touching bounce or something like that, but I like this way. It's a little more mathy, which makes sense because we are controlling these little sprites on a 2D math grid, so it's important to understand that they just represent numbers, and if we can control them with if statements, we have a lot more control over our project than if we let Scratch try to figure out if it's hitting and bouncing. So this should actually say Y position. If the Y position is ever less than the paddle's Y position, which I have a variable for, then I want it to bounce. And the way to get it to bounce is just change its Y step. Because if it's hitting, it's always coming down into the paddle, so it's always got a Y step of -5. So here, I'll just set Y step to 5, and it should bounce. Let's see. If it hits my paddle, it should bounce off, because it's always going down. Oh, okay. Good, not great. It's like, it's bouncing up the bottom edge. See that? But it is bouncing. I don't want it to bounce off the bottom edge, though. How did I draw this sprite? That should be the top corner. Maybe I'll say if it's less than... I mean, my paddle's in the same spot every time. It's not changing its Y position. So maybe what I'll do is I'll go to the tennis ball. And I'll say paddle Y plus 10, maybe? Let's look. I don't want it to bounce at the bottom. I want it to bounce up the top. Let's have a look. Oops. Forgot to move it. Just gotta play with the numbers. No, that was okay. Let me just move my ball here. Oh, I get it, because it's because the ball has a radius and it's registered from the center. So you can see my ball position here is, when it's touching the paddle, it's 124, but my paddle's position is 140 in the Y. So I'll say 15. I'm going to add 15 to this. And then should bounce off the top of the thing. Missed there. A little bit glitchy. We might have to play with the numbers, but it does bounce. If you get it near the edge, it will just go through, I think. It's definitely knowing that it's hitting the thing and bouncing. It's kind of neat. Could even change that number to like 16 or 17. See that? That was a little glitch because I ran my paddle into the ball. And so it's, if you can get the ball underneath the paddle, what it'll do is it'll think it's, it'll know it's lower than the paddle, and it'll know it's between it, so it'll just continually bounce it. So you got to find a way to stop that by quitting the game if the person gets to the bottom by accident. Maybe you could make a little red bar at the bottom and say if they hit that, then the game is over. You could play with it. But that's how you do collision in any kind of coding language, really basic collision. So you do if statements and check the numbers of stuff. Be cool if you could see, if it hits the left side of the paddle, bounce it left. If it hits the right side, bounce it right. But that's like next level. You don't have to do anything like that. But you have to go to your Scratch lab instructions there. If you look here, you need, for perfect marks, your game has to keep score. It has to have a nice design, and it has to have an extra feature. Do you want to maybe speed up the ball, or add some AI, or make something fun in there that can make the game a little more interesting than just bouncing a paddle off a ball? So that we'll spend this week finishing up, okay? So work on that today and Thursday and Friday. Make sure your game is great. Get a cool background that can add right away. Look, all of a sudden, guys, I'm on the beach and I'm playing volleyball with my friends. Okay? Look at that. My whole game just changed. Now, check this out. Okay? Now all of a sudden, hold on. Wait a minute. Now all of a sudden, I'm in my bedroom and I'm playing ping pong with some friends. Okay? And what do you know? Now all of a sudden, I'm at a rock concert and I'm in the back room kicking the ball around with my bandmates, okay? So even just a background can make it better. So get working on that. That's what we'll be doing. My code will be a little different than yours depending on how you set yours up.